Good evening, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth, to another episode of Disguise Coverage, part of the Cover One Sports Network. I am your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on the old Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, 2 ANT. Give me a follow on the old Twitter, or I always like to give other options just in case follows aren't your thing. So if follows aren't your thing, that's fine. I'll gladly take any one of the Horcruxes that Voldemort created. But I guess technically they're all destroyed now, so you also need a time machine to go back. So you need a time machine, and then you'd also have to acquire that. So whatever's easier, the whole time machine, Horcrux thing, or a simple follow on Twitter, whatever is your poison, pick that. I'm pretty agreeable and simple to all things. Whatever podcasting app, platform, YouTube, whatever you're using to listen to, watch, whatever, view this episode, please rate and review and subscribe. Drop a like as well. I mention every week. I know it sounds corny, but it's tremendously helpful to help myself and the Cover One team to track and trend and get in front of more eyeballs and out in there for more ears to hear when you drop a like, a review, and a subscription, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes I go a little longer. And I see the comment in the chat there, Nick. Yeah, I forgot I can't say Voldemort. I'm supposed to say he who must not be named. So I messed up on that one. But I normally go a little longer with the intro, but not tonight. Tonight, I have a very special guest that I'm very excited for. And without further ado, he's sitting there in the green room. I guess if you want to call it a green room, whatever. He's smirking because I said that. That's awesome. Mr. Ryan Talbot of many things. So the Shout Buffalo podcast with Matt Perino, NewYorkUpstate.com, Syracuse.com. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Enjoyed all the Harry Potter talk. So,
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it. I wonder how many people don't know what those references are. So like, what's Mudblood? And I do it like every week. I just rotate or change a few things. So yeah, I appreciate you picking up on that, and I appreciate you stopping by. You are one of the most respected Twitter follows for myself, for a lot of Bills fans. Just your insight and your writing ability, and part of the reason is, you and I went back and forth with the DMs that I wanted to bring you on tonight was your knowledge and insight and just the firsthand experience that you've had throughout this offseason for this Bills team, which is, I don't want to say the most exciting offseason in recent memory, but there's just so much on the line this season in terms of the hope and expectation and the legitimacy behind it. This isn't like, well, I think Jeff Toole might be the future and we might be okay here. This is legitimate, and you've been on the front lines this offseason, really being able to see and witness everything firsthand.
Yeah, and it has been an exciting offseason if you're a Bills fan. Listen, they were in the AFC Championship game 1 year ago. I think playoff expectations were to be expected, but I'm not sure how many people saw them going all the way to the championship 1 year ago. And now those expectations have been elevated, I think is the best way of putting it, because now it's Super Bowl or bust almost. And they certainly didn't hurt their roster this offseason. I think they strengthened it in a lot of ways. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens between now and the regular season in terms of some roster gymnastics that need to take place and maybe solidifying a few spots that suddenly seem kind of vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to dive into early, the vulnerability in some of the spots on the roster with recent news, performances, and expectations for this week's preseason finale against Green Bay, what to watch for, who to watch for in terms of individual players, positional groupings, run the whole gamut with that. But before we get into that, I mentioned a lot of wrestling things on this show. I have that I'm always terrible at this and figuring out what side is what. There we go. I have the old school WWF Intercontinental title behind me. Ryan, you are a wrestling fan. And as I told you in the DMs when we went over this episode, I was going to ask you 3 easy wrestling questions. Nothing too in-depth, nothing too crazy, but just to see, kind of what you vibe on and who you are as a wrestling fan. What do you think? How does that sound?
Yeah, it sounds great to me. I'm ready for it. And hello to everyone in the chat. I see a lot of people saying hello. So hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, we usually get a lot of, knock on wood, I'm very superstitious. We usually get a lot of engagement and chat here on Disguise Coverage. Part of the reason why the show usually runs a little longer. I try to get to like any and every comment that goes through. And tonight is no exception, everyone. So any question, thought, comment, concern, philosophy, ideology, maxim, take, whatever you got, throw it into the chat. And we will try to get to them, and I'll try to get to them by the end of the show. But now it's questions for Ryan. So easy right off the bat. Question 1, who's your favorite wrestler of all time?
Macho Man Randy Savage. I thought, because I was big as a younger kid into Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. Those guys were right up there as well. But then when I was actually like getting a little bit older and I'd go back and watch some of those matches, Savage was just so good in terms of carrying matches in the ring, personality. He had a little bit of everything. Whereas I think they limited some of their bigger guys in terms of what they could do. I don't want to go too long in this response, but if you've ever watched any of Hulk Hogan's matches from like Japan,
yes,
to WWF, it was night and day in terms of some of the things he would do in the ring and could do in the ring.
Yeah, he could really wrestle when you saw him in Japan. I was like,
could.
Oh, man, he could work.
He could. So I think they limited their big men, but Savage, because he was a little bit smaller, he was able to do a lot more things, and I really enjoyed him across the board, from work rate to personality, microphone skills, everything.
Beautiful answer. And similar things for me as I got older, I always knew Macho Man like as a little kid and then watching him go to WCW and all those things. But as I got older, I think when I first saw the match with him and Ricky Steamboat, and I was just like, because Macho Man was always a character to me as like a kid. And then, yeah, exactly to your point, as I got older, I realized he was a tremendous athlete. And then his baseball career and just who he was in the ring was, yeah, he's one of the all-time greats. Good choice. I like that. That's a good start. Second question. I know this one's a little harder. This one's always harder for me, but do you have a favorite match of all time? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. I was always a big fan of Steamboat versus Savage from WrestleMania 3, but let me see if I can think of a different one, because there have been some really good ones. I'll go with the first ladder match between Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 10. That was different for its time. There were some ladder matches that like Bret Hart did, that were sometimes televised, things like that. But that first one between HBK and Razor Ramon was a really good one. So I'll go with that one.
Good choice. WrestleMania 10. I have my favorite wrestler of all time is Bret Hart. So WrestleMania 10 is one that I hold dear to me. And yeah, that ladder match. Oh, good choice. Good choice. I'm very happy with your answers. I was hoping they weren't going to be terrible. I mean, I wasn't going to do anything about it, but if they were bad, I was like, oh man, like his favorite wrestler is like Duke the Dumpster Drosy. I was going to be like, what is going on?
Great reference.
Thank you. Last question. So I know you still keep up with wrestling today. You often tweet about it and say things about it. Who is your favorite current wrestler across any promotion, anything you like?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what? I'm not sure if he is my favorite wrestler right now, but I am so impressed with the work that Roman Reigns has done since he's come back as a heel. My wife will watch because my son's big into it as well. And she's like, oh, I can't stand him. I can't wait till he loses the title. And she said that for like Brock Lesnar in the past. And I understood it with that because that's a part-time guy. He's barely there. Reigns is showing up every week on TV. He's doing great promos. The one thing about Heyman was it felt like whoever they put with Heyman, he was the mouthpiece for them. He's not so much the mouthpiece for Roman Reigns. He still gets his segments. He still gets his bits in. But Roman Reigns is cutting the promos. And a lot of his work with Cena, I thought, was phenomenal in terms of the mic work. And the ring ethic, I think everything's there too. And then if you go over to AEW, there's a lot of guys that I like over there, whether you're talking pure wrestling, whether you're talking entertainment value. My son loves the Lucha Express. So I've enjoyed watching them a little bit. And obviously the Elite and all of them, they're pretty entertaining as well. So I think it's good that there seems to be a healthy competition ongoing. I think that usually brings out the best in both companies.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's a very good parallel to football as we start to segue into the Buffalo Bills part of the show. But yeah, competition often brings out the best in guys, and good choice with Roman Reigns, somebody who was seen as like the chosen one and the prodigy and just kept getting force-fed down our throats and nobody bought it. And since coming back, this heel run has just been, you really see with this what you can do when you change a character, whether it's heel or face or whatever, and just, yeah, they hit on it. An awesome point with, I think they started him with Heyman to be the mouthpiece, but add credibility. And as we've gone forward, Roman has just stepped more into the foreground and spoken for himself, exactly to your point. Good answers. That's a good start. I'm going to clap it up for that. Clap it up for that. But as I mentioned, now we start to segue into the football part of the show, which I'm sure all of you are here for. I know we have a decent amount of wrestling fans that watch this, so I'm sure they enjoyed that as well. But we're going to start with the Bills stuff now. So this episode was titled Buffalo Bills Preseason - Final Impressions. And as we start to wind down, we have the 53-man roster that is going to be solidified in the next coming days. We've got the final preseason game against Green Bay coming this weekend. We are 2 weeks away from tonight of regular season football starting with the Buccaneers and the Cowboys. So everything is right upon us, and we're going to jump right into it. So Ryan, you mentioned it earlier with some things with depth and, stuff going on with the roster right now. We've just unfortunately seen a decent rash and string of recent injuries, whether it was Harrison Phillips, whether it was Isaiah McKenzie, Jaquan Johnson. You got Taron Johnson showing up in like a cast or a wrap out of nowhere. Dane Jackson's getting an MRI. So what do you make of the recent string of injuries? And I guess more importantly, how do you think they'll impact the final roster decisions?
I think it's going to impact the final roster decisions in a big time way, depending on the severity of the injuries, because then it makes Brandon Beane have to do some roster gymnastics. So I don't want to choose any of those specific players because I don't know. We haven't been given specifics in terms of how long some of these players are going to be out. For instance, we were told Isaiah McKenzie's between day to day and week to week, so I don't think he's an IR candidate or anything like that. But there's going to be players that the Bills need to get onto that 53-man roster, and to do that, you're going to have to cut some players. And when I say that, I don't mean players that weren't going to make this roster. I mean some veterans that have that 4 years. That are fully vested in the NFL that you could then give that handshake deal to. They did it last year with Dean Marlowe and with Andre Roberts. I think they're going to do that with maybe a handful of guys this year. And your counterpart there at Cover One, Greg Tomset, put out a list of those players: Levi Wallace, Isaiah McKenzie, Tywan Jones, Matt Breida, Jacob Hollister. Those are all guys that you could cut. And if you do see any of those names come up on the cut list, don't panic. It's most likely, listen, wait in the parking lot until the next day, and we're going to bring you back into this building. We just need to get so-and-so and so-and-so on the 53-man roster, move them to the IR, move them to whatever list that is, because this year you can put guys on the IR short term. It's unlimited in terms of like 3 weeks or however long that, they deem it to be. So they're going to have to move some players around. So it is a little concerning. If there was one position that I'm most concerned about, I would say it's cornerback, because you said it. Taron Johnson in the slot had some kind of wrap on. Saran Neal, when he's played on the outside boundary area, he has not been at his best. He's more of a slot guy. I'll give him the credit there, but you're already a little worried there. Outside, you have Trey White, and opposite Trey White, you have Levi Wallace, who's currently dealing with some kind of hip ailment. You have Dane Jackson that's getting an MRI, and then you have some serious questions about who's behind them. I don't think you've seen enough from Rashad Wildgoose this training camp, this preseason, to feel comfortable with him being necessarily on this 53-man roster. They might keep him aboard because he was a draft pick, and you generally try to keep those guys. But with a roster this deep, I think there's going to be a lot of day 3 guys that are not on the final roster when all is said and done. And I don't want to skip ahead, but I think Saturday's game is huge for a guy like Cam Lewis. If Cam Lewis can come in and look the part and play well, he could be on this final 53-man roster when all is said and done because of those injuries, because they have some concerns there. If no one steps up on Saturday, the Bills could either swing a trade with another team before cut down day, or they don't have to do it before either. We're starting to see that though throughout the league, whether it's player for player trades, player for draft pick trades. The Bills might be in on an outside boundary cornerback, or worst case scenario, some of these players get cut, whether it's cap casualties or whether it's just because the roster or another roster is deep at that position. The Bills are going to look for some cornerbacks, I think, when all is said and done. Some guys that maybe fit, that can do a little bit of man, but can also do a lot of zone, because the Bills have done that. I think they're going to try to be a little bit more blended this year in terms of what they do, man versus zone, but they need that versatility, and I think that's one position that they're really concerned about right now.
That, first of all, tremendously comprehensive answer. Well done. Appreciate you. That's exactly why I wanted to bring you on. Follow up with that. You mentioned corner. I love Gregory Rousseau and his ceiling and trajectory. Everything looks tremendous. And I like Basham and Spencer Brown as well. But throughout this offseason on this show, and actually for anyone that'll hear me, even to my wife when she doesn't even know what I'm saying, I've been banging the drum for a corner 2 addition, whether it was in the draft or free agency, someone with a little more scheme versatility, but overall just from a depth perspective, because I was worried with, I'm okay with the platoon of Levi and Dane Jackson and then Tre'Davious White on his island on the other side. But after that, we're very thin in terms of experience and playability and guys with the floor that what you're going to get out of. Do you think, going into training camp in this preseason, were you worried about the depth at corner and and the problems there have just been kind of more put under a microscope now with the injuries? Or do you think the concerns with depth and overall functionality of that position grouping is more due to the injuries than it is the grouping itself?
It's a great question. I think when you really think about Levi Wallace, just because he's been on the team for so long, fans don't consider him that veteran option.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been in the league now for almost a handful of years,
Yeah.
and he was brought back to this roster to kind of play that veteran role that EJ Gaines was supposed to do, that Vontae Davis was supposed to do, or Josh Norman, Bill's legend, or Josh Norman last year.
Mm.
And I think that when the Bills have brought in those veterans, minus Gaines' first stint, in his first stint with the Bills when they traded for him, he was very good when he was on the field. It was, again, he had some injuries. He was banged up at times. He was very good. But I feel like the Bills almost feel like, boy, we've kind of struck out on a lot of these veterans that we've brought in to compete. They haven't won the job. When they've been on the field, they've been okay. I thought Josh Norman was better than a lot of people gave him credit for last year when he was on the field. He was nothing spectacular, but he was solid. So when they brought Levi back in, he was supposed to kind of be like that veteran option. And then you have Dane Jackson, who I think maybe that's where the concern comes in. I really feel like Brandon Beane and company thought, this guy was a gamer last year. Anytime he came in, he looked the part. He played well. Let's really give him a legitimate chance to win this job. So let's bring in a Levi Wallace to compete against him. I think Dane Jackson's fallen a little bit flat this summer. And listen, he's still a young kid. He was a 7th-round pick last year. When he came in, it was in these spot areas. There was an injury in the Seattle game. So he comes in, first plays matched up against DK Metcalf. They throw to Metcalf on a quick pass. He tackles him immediately.
Beautiful.
There's an injury in the Arizona game. He's one-on-one with DeAndre Hopkins. He breaks it up in the end zone. He gets an interception against the Jets. He's shining in moments. But he was never that guy that was out there for 30, 40 plus snaps per game. Mm. So I think they were kind of saying, well, let's just see how he looks in an expanded role. And I think he's had, he's been okay, but I don't think he's met those expectations. So because of that, because of the recent rash of injuries, I think there's a little bit of mix there in terms of the concern.
That's a really good point overall, and especially on Dane. I think he had a limited sample size last year, and to your point, in that limited sample size, he gets the interception against the Jets, and then he sticks DK Metcalf, and he covers Hop one-on-one, and you've got people coming into this offseason being like, oh, we not only do we not need to sign or draft a corner, we don't even necessarily need Levi back because Dane can lock up corner number 2. And then even when Levi comes back, there are people who are on the train of, well, Dane is going to win CB2 and it's his position to lose. And Levi's just been that model of consistency. And yeah, Dane, I think maybe we as a fan base started to have, I don't want to say unfair expectations for Dane Jackson, but I think people just saw the hit rate on that small sample size for him last year and expected, oh my God, this guy could be a future thing. But this year he's shown, to your point, a little more inconsistency, and he's shown like a late round pick where he's going to have ups and downs. He's going to have those days where he struggles. He's going to have some really nice flashes like he has the ability for. That's definitely something to keep an eye on, and something that, again, like I mentioned, I've been banging the drum for corner all offseason. I am a little worried with the injuries as you are. Continuing with the training camp flow, we started to talk about some performance things. You mentioned Dane Jackson. There's been a lot of standouts this offseason, and especially in training camp for the Buffalo Bills on both sides of the ball. And we've seen guys just take huge jumps in their performance. We've seen rookies come in and set the bar very high for themselves. So I know there's a lot to choose from for this next question, but who has surprised you the most this training camp and preseason?
Yeah, offensively, Jake Kumerow, and it was before Aaron Rodgers was talking about him. A lot of people think that the media just started talking about Kumerow after Aaron Rodgers mentioned him as their second best receiver in last year's training camp, but it's truly not the case. Matt does the daily write-ups and observations, and every day that Kumerow was shining, he had something about him, making a big catch, winning the one-on-ones against Trey White, doing really well in 11-on-11, whatever the case may be. He looked the part throughout training camp. He's been solid all along, and I think he's really earned that spot. as wide receiver 6, but not just wide receiver 6, what he brings to the special teams unit as well. 6 games last year in Buffalo, 95 special teams snaps, took on that Taiwan Jones role when he needed to on special teams, which is one of the most important, if not the most important role on that coverage unit. So he showed that he can do a lot for them in a little sample size last year. So I think that they really wanted to see what he could do, and he shined. Defensively, it almost has to be Greg Rousseau. When they drafted Rousseau, it was going to be, well, there's going to be a red shirt season almost where he's not going to have to come in and play much, and he might be inactive, kind of like AJ Epinesa was early on in his rookie year. I don't see that being the case. Now, he's not going to come out and play 50 snaps in week 1 or anything like that either. They're going to work him in behind your Jerry Hugheses and your Mario Addisons. But you can still kick him inside in certain scenarios. You can play him outside when you want to give those veterans a rest. I think that he has looked the part, and I've said this before. A lot of people just think that because these players opted out last year that they were sitting on their couch or something for a year. That's not the case. What these players were doing is they were working with trainers who work with NFL players, and they were working on their body composition. They were learning what they should be eating, what they shouldn't be eating. They were doing a lot of the same training drills that NFL players do before a season leading up to that. So I think he's more polished than people realize. And you've already seen it in preseason. Now, mind you, it's preseason. You don't want to overhype it. But Penei Sewell was a top 10 pick that he absolutely beat on early in that Detroit game, using his length, using his power, using his size. He did it again in the Chicago game where he looked the part. 7 pass rush snaps, and he had 3 pressures, 2 hits, and 1 sack. That's impressive. And I get it. It's really just 3 plays total because that he really shined. But 3 out of 7 plays, that's a lot in the NFL. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm not saying he's coming in and he's setting some kind of sack record for a rookie for the Bills or anything of the sort. But I think by the end of the year, it's going to be more of like a 50-50 split, or he's going to be having the majority of the snaps over those veterans that I mentioned, where he might be the lead dog of all the defensive ends by the end of the year. That's how well I think he's played.
Oh, and that's a huge statement, especially considering, again, all the things of his, how green he was or raw he was as a player and in his journey. And yeah, he's just come out of the gate firing. And if he continues on that upward trajectory and trend, that would be tremendous. In speaking in what you just said there, you also mentioned the whole red shirt aspect for Gregory Rousseau. And there were several people who thought that would be the case, even more so because of the Bills taking Carlos Basham. Rousseau has looked great. Epinesa has looked great. Obata has looked great. Basham's kind of flown under the radar more a little bit, not necessarily playing terrible, but just because he's, for better or for worse, been outshined by several others at his position, especially Rousseau. What are your thoughts on Boogie Basham so far this preseason and in training camp?
I thought he had a really good preseason game last week. I think he's had some solid practices here and there, maybe not as consistent as Rousseau. The one thing that I will bring up on his, in his defense is the Bills are also playing him a little bit more on the inside than they are with Rousseau. F.A. Obata, he has experience doing that already from his Carolina days, playing inside outside. So he has that experience. And, I've seen Greg here in the comments. I was just on a show with Greg and we were talking about Cody Ford. And one thing I didn't get to bring up about Cody Ford was not only was that guy injured early in his career, I think what hurt him in terms of his play early in his career is the Bills are trying him at tackle and at guard.
Jumping all around.
When you're trying to get a young player to play more than one position, their head's spinning already as it is, even if it's just block the guy in front of you, which it's not that simple if you're an offensive lineman. Don't get me wrong. But your head's spinning. Look at Darrell Williams. Williams, when the Bills signed him before this extension, or before they re-signed him, they got a bargain on him because he was coming off of a terrible year with the Carolina Panthers. Why was it a terrible year? Because they started him at left tackle, left guard, and right tackle throughout that season. If you have someone show up for their job and you give them 4 different jobs throughout the day, their head's going to be spinning too. It's just the way it is. So I think, Boogie Basham, I think he's going to be fine as the year goes on. You're going to see more and more out of him. But yeah, if they really want to use him as more of an inside-outside player, it's going to take some time for him to get comfortable in both of those regards. But I think he is coming off of a really impressive outing in the second preseason game against the Chicago Bears.
Well said. And yeah, I completely second that notion. It's first off the insight on the Cody Ford piece. Yeah, it's just especially getting adjusted to the NFL, just in terms of the on-field aspects, let alone the off-the-field aspects, and adjusting to everyday life as an NFL player in a brand new city. For most people, you're adjusting to all the just even the little things of like, where do I grocery shop? What does my daily routine look like? Let alone trying to compete against some of the best athletes in the world. And when you're getting jumped around from position to position, it's tough. And I think that's definitely appropriate for Boogie Basham. And yeah, you were spot on. I don't want to say it's night and day, but his performance in the Chicago game was very largely and strongly better than it was in his performance against Detroit. I didn't think he had a terrible game against Detroit, but I didn't love it. I thought he had some snaps that were kind of mad, but he flashed several times in a positive way against Chicago. So well said. Well said. You mentioned this earlier, as we start to get into the positional battles and who needs to show up, you spoke about corner. So if that's your answer, feel free to stay with it on this question. But what position battles can be the most impacted by a positive or negative performance versus Green Bay?
Well, in addition to Cam Lewis, who I said could maybe earn a spot on this roster with all the injuries, I think there's other areas too. I feel like Reggie Gilliam is valued enough where he is already on the right side of the bubble.
Yep,
but if he comes in and just, blocks really well again as a fullback, he had a really good block on Zach Moss's run. He had the 2 touchdown runs. He brings versatility as a hybrid fullback tight end. And with Tommy Sweeney, we don't really know the severity of his injury right now. He could even be tight end number 3 for the team right now, but if he has another strong game, I think that helps him and then really solidifies his cause. I feel like he's already there. Don't get me wrong. And then one player that I think is on the outside or is close to the outside as you can be looking in might be like a guy like Tyrell Dodson. I don't know how many linebackers this team is going to carry with all these other issues going on. You're probably only going to carry 2 quarterbacks, so that gives you a little flexibility to keep 7 defensive ends possibly. You might need to keep an extra cornerback now. So where's that going to come from? This, that, and the other. Linebacker, the Bills obviously love their starting duo. They're basically playing with 2 linebackers on the field most of the time, with Edmonds and with Milano. They like AJ Klein, especially the role that they carved out for him last year. So I feel like he's, maybe he'd be like that sneaky under the radar, no one saw it coming type cut, but I don't see that. I see him being on the roster as well. Tyler Metakevich, he's their best special teams linebacker. And in addition to that, I think he's had a really good offseason, whether you're talking training camp or the preseason. And then now you're at linebacker 5. How can you say no to Andre Smith right now for that role?
Tough.
Andre Smith was great last year on special teams. He's still very good on special teams, but in the preseason, he's been all over the field on defense, making plays for this team. He's been making plays at training camp. He has stood out. If you're valuing this based on who's stood out the most, played the best, he's probably linebacker 5. And if you're only carrying 5, well, that's already bad news for Tyrell Dodson. But if you're carrying 6, Dodson still has to prove that he's more valuable than a Joe Giles Harris, which, I think that the Bills probably do value him a little bit higher than Giles Harris. But you never know, because last year we saw, and I'm blanking on his name right now, the linebacker that no one was expecting. Now, mind you, there was the COVID, so most of the media wasn't at training camp practices. He made the team.
Phillips?
Delshon, thank you, Phillips. I know he didn't really actually contribute much in season. Injuries occurred, and then I think he might be with the Jets now. I can't remember that for sure. But yeah, you just never know. So I think that Dodson needs an impactful game to show that he should be one of those linebackers on this roster.
You mentioned in that statement there, the tight end grouping and the linebacker grouping.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, how valid of an idea do you think it is? Again, you mentioned an idea that I am a massive proponent of. I like Tommy Sweeney, but I like the idea at tight end of going Knox, Hollister, and Reggie Gilliam as your technically like your 3rd tight end. And then at linebacker, you mentioned that we go, we are a primary nickel defense, so we have 2 starting linebackers as opposed to a team who runs base with 3 starting linebackers. Do you think going lighter at those positions on the roster at linebacker, having 5 is okay because you really only have 2 starters. And then at tight end, only going with maybe really 2 true tight ends in Hollister and Knox. Can you get away with that on defense because you run a primary nickel defense? And can you get away with going lighter at tight end on offense because the Bills don't run a lot of tight end focused offensive sets? They are more of a primarily wide receiver driven offense. Do you think they can get away with going lighter, or do you still think they still need to lean more towards the traditional formulas for roster construction at tight end and linebacker?
No, I think they absolutely can go lighter, especially at linebacker. Like you said, that base defense is generally 2 linebackers on the field. You might need to play more of a base 4-3 at certain times this season. You look at some of these teams that can run the ball pretty well. You want to look strong up front and stop the run. So those Patriot teams, you might want to do that, but that's okay too, because in addition to your main roster, you're going to have that expanded practice squad again this season. So you can have a few guys that you can elevate throughout the season there as well. So absolutely at linebacker. Tight end, I like Tommy Sweeney. I think he's a solid blocker. I think he's better as a receiver than people give him credit for, but there's injuries and there's not a lot of tape on him. He's that type of player that Bills fans are familiar with, but a lot of teams across the league, I don't see necessarily putting in a claim for Tommy Sweeney because they have their own coveted players that they're going to be trying to get onto practice squads and make sure that they're finalizing their 53-man rosters. They're not looking at a Tommy Sweeney necessarily. So I think Sweeney is someone that worst case scenario could sneak onto this team's practice squad. And when it comes to a guy like Reggie Gilliam being that third tight end, you've heard Sean McDermott say it. The more you can do for this team, the better. And Gilliam can do so much for the team. It's why I see a guy like Gilliam being able to have a role, not necessarily just with the Bills, but in the NFL for 5 to 7 years, just because even with the fullback role dying out across the league, he does so much for a team. That's why a guy like Ryan Bates is always going to be so valued by the Bills, because he can do so many roles on the offensive line. He's one of those players that can actually do that. He's not necessarily ever going to be an NFL starter, but if you need a right tackle in a pinch, or if you need a swing tackle in a pinch, he's your guy. If you need a center because something happens to Mitch Morse, you don't want to kick Feliciano over, he's your guy. He's that versatile. He's that good. So players like Gilliam, players like Bates, the more you can do, the more valued you are by this coaching staff and regime.
That's a tremendous point, especially on Bates, who I think people don't really remember or recognize his versatility. But yeah, Reggie Gilliam, I mean, his versatility was on display against Chicago. He's getting your fullback snaps and running dives. We know what he does on special teams. And then he's the running back that closes it out in the second half. He's getting legitimate halfback carries and runs, and actually looked above average doing it. And when you can wear that many hats, and especially for him functioning like an H-back and running back on offense, in addition to special teams, yeah, you just drastically improve your stock and odds of staying on the team. As we continue on that turn, we got a couple more questions to go through. So you mentioned a little bubble player action, some roster things, and positional battles, and we spoke about that briefly. But what bubble players can lock up a roster spot with a strong performance against Green Bay? Who's maybe on the fence a little bit, but if they have another solid game, or if they just have that one big, strong game against Green Bay, they can lock up a roster spot? Who do you got in that type of mold?
Well, it sounds encouraging in terms of Marquez Stevenson being on the practice field today, so I'm thinking he might actually play. I think with the players leaving the facility for 5 days, the injuries that have been happening at wide receiver, I think the Bills might just be in that mindset. We have to keep 7 wide receivers anyways. And he's shined in the first 2 preseason games. First game, 42-yard reception to set up the game-winning field goal. Second game, obviously the long return for a touchdown. I think if he's out there and he shows his value once more in some capacity, whether it's as a returner or a receiver, the Bills might say, listen, it would be unwise to try to cut this guy and sneak him onto our practice squad. He was a 6th-round pick. There was a reason he was a 6th-round pick. He is a little bit raw in areas, but one thing that a lot of NFL teams covet is speed, and that is something that he brings to the table, straight line speed. So I think that he's someone that's in play there. I mentioned Cam Lewis. I really do think that there is a chance for him to play his way onto this roster. And then in terms of an actual battle, I've loved the back and forth at that safety depth position between Damar Hamlin and Josh Thomas. I had Josh Thomas on my 53-man roster projection after the first preseason game. I thought he was excellent in run support. Damar Hamlin, though, was really good in this last preseason game. So if everything's neck and neck, they probably keep the draft pick from this year in Hamlin, knowing full well that Josh Thomas is very limited film on him, NFL film on him at least, because he wasn't on the main roster last year. He's elevated a few times. But they know what they have in him, and he's, again, someone that they feel like they could probably sneak onto that practice squad. At the end of the day, though, we also don't know what's going on with Jaquan Johnson in terms of how long he's out. So maybe he's one of those guys that's on the initial roster, Johnson, and depending on the severity of the injury, maybe he gets moved to one of those injury lists, and then both guys make it. So there's a few players that I'm definitely keeping an eye on Saturday afternoon.
These injuries just make these final roster decisions that much harder and that much more murky and cloudy in terms of, knowing exactly what you're going to get. Briefly, I just wanted to touch on, you mentioned Marquez Stevenson. He's been linked hand in hand with Isaiah McKenzie since we drafted him. Like, oh, could he be the returner? Does he take over? Does one of them make it? Do both of them make it? None of them, so on and so forth. When it comes to McKenzie, we've known about the return dropsies issues, a little bit of the yips. He did have one against Chicago, but all reports are, and I'm sure you can attest to this, or if you're allowed to or not, he's looked very strong throughout training camp when it's come to catching kicks and in terms of having that ball security. Are you still worried about the dropsies and his ball security issue in the kick return game at all? Or do you think that drop against Chicago was more of just an aberration and it's behind him?
I think the best way I can put this is I think the coaching staff has a lot of faith in him as a return man, whether you're talking kick returner or punt returner. And I think that it's really going to be his job to lose in the regular season. Realistically, I think on kick returns, he's going to be fine this season. Even if he muffs the kick, generally there's enough time for you to recover, pick it up, and do something with it. Yeah. If it's the punt return issue, I'm not a big fan of Micah Hyde going back there and being your punt returner, but he's reliable. He's done it throughout his career. He's good at it. I would simply tell him, I don't care where you are in the field. If you're within the 5-yard line, let it go over your head and hope it goes in the end zone. But if you're anywhere else and it comes to you, wave that hand up. I don't care if you think you have all the room in the world. I'm not letting that guy take a hit because he's too important to that defense. But, when you're comparing Isaiah McKenzie to Marquez Stevenson, I don't think it's fair to the latter player there because, they're both smaller guys that have speed, but it's even different speed. McKenzie's a little bit twitchier. He's a little bit more savvy where it's straight line speed for Stevenson. People have to understand that Isaiah McKenzie has come so far along in his stint with Buffalo. He was originally a return option and a gadget player. That was his role. He is a legitimate slot receiver now. If something were to happen to Cole Beasley in season injury-wise, there's going to be a little bit of a drop-off because you're talking about an all-pro, one of, if not the best slot receivers in the game. But at the same time, I think the Bills' offense wouldn't necessarily miss a beat because they have that much confidence in McKenzie and what he can do now as a route runner, as a receiver, as a guy that can make explosive plays on the field, just as a receiver now, not just on the end arounds, not just on those gadget plays. He is a legitimate receiver now. So Stevenson in time, maybe he will be like that, but he needs that time. He needs a lot of development. He's still very much raw, kind of like McKenzie was when he first came to Buffalo.
Oh, excellent points. I don't think it can be overstated this offseason just how impressive Isaiah McKenzie has looked as an offensive player, as just a pure wide receiver, not just a gadget or a fun little trick play guy, as a legitimate route runner, person who understands how to leverage coverage and read what's going on in front of him and understand where the soft spot in the zone is. Yeah, he's just been a revelation. And we know he's spoken multiple times last year about what he's learned from being in the same wide receiver room as Cole Beasley and the nuances that he's picked up and understood. So excellent point there on McKenzie. And we got this last question as we start to wrap up with your time here. I'd like to thank you very much for joining. I know you're a busy man. You got a lot of places to go. But 2021, there's a lot of candidates for who's going to break out, who's going to have a great year. Who is your breakout player for 2021 for the Buffalo Bills?
I'm going to go with Greg Rousseau. Like I was telling you earlier in the show, I think by the end of the season, he claims a starting role on this defensive line where he is playing the majority of the reps over these veterans. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. One, because of what we've seen in small flashes, but two, because you have two players in Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes who are both over 30, who are both in the final year of their contracts, and players who are probably going to play better if you have them off the field and they're coming in fresh with fresh legs and you're using them wisely. I think this can help both of their careers this year, having a lot of these younger options. And if not Rousseau, I think you could make a strong case for AJ Epinesa. Epinesa has really come along nicely as well. I think the Bills have to feel sneakily good about that pairing for future years of Epinesa and Rousseau. Epinesa had one of the oddest rookie years, not in terms of his play, but he comes in during the COVID year. There's no traditional offseason. Most of his meetings are over Zoom, doesn't meet his coaches or teammates for quite a while. Comes in, the Bills pretty much tell him, we need you to drop about 20 pounds.
Easy.
By the way, in season, can you drop about 20 pounds for us? And he does it, but that's going to obviously slow his development a little bit too. And now he has a full offseason to work on his game now at that 260 range rather than at 280. And you've started to see that burst off the edge, that explosiveness. Mm-hmm. You're starting to see the power, the pass rush moves. So I could see both of those players being breakout candidates for this team, allowing Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes to play limited reps, but those limited reps with them being fresh would be very valuable to this team in big moments, in big games where they need to get after the quarterback.
That's a huge point right there. We know Sean McDermott wants to rotate that front four. We know the defense will blitz from time to time, but in an ideal world, this defense is dropping 7 and rushing 4. And in order to do that, you have to continuously have fresh bodies along that defensive line. And the younger guys have naturally fresher legs. And if you can set Jerry and Mario up for success by having them be not situational players, but allow them to stay fresher later in the game and almost close things out, that would be huge. And yeah, Rousseau looks like just a monster out there who continues to win. And that would be awesome if he breaks out like that. And AJ Epinesa has been my breakout player since February of this year. I just thought anytime you hit on it and spoke about it a little, the dedication and the focus and the mental fortitude and strength that it takes to drop that weight almost at the drop of a hat and continue to like maintain play as you're adjusting to the NFL and COVID and life and all these things. I just thought it said so much about AJ Epinesa. And I mean, we've seen him transform his body. And when you add in the technical improvements that he's had, yeah, just a lot of tremendous things and positivity up front that we might have from the Bills young guys when it comes to the defensive line. And we're going to keep going here on disguise coverage, but we are going to say bye to Mr. Ryan Talbot, who I mentioned is a very busy man. But I greatly appreciate you stopping by and adding your insight to this super fun Bills offseason and training camp and heading into the final preseason game. You, as I mentioned earlier in the lead in, you are a tremendous follow. You've got just, again, I keep using the word, but it really is perfect. Tremendous insight and analysis. And I couldn't be happier with you stopping by and joining me here tonight. So thank you very much for that. And I know the chat was blowing up with appreciation for you. So thank you for stopping by. And why don't you tell the people of the Disguise Coverage Nation, I've never said that before and I don't like how it sounds. So I'm probably not going to say that ever again. Tell them where they can find you and what to do and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, first and foremost, thanks for having me on. I had a great time here, too, tonight, from wrestling to football talk across the board. You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Talbot Bills. You can find my work at NewYorkUpstate.com and Syracuse.com. And you can find the Shout, Buffalo Football Podcast, and all your favorite podcast platforms. And when we go live, we're also on YouTube. We are on Facebook as well, so you can stream us live, and you can also follow along on Twitter.
I think you've also got one of the best backgrounds in the game with the Threat Level Midnight poster. That needs to be talked about more. That's an awesome. I'm proud of some of the things I got going on, but I pale in comparison to what you got. Yeah, you're a pro. Well done. And yeah, we're going to continue trudging on here. I'm going to be going solo for the rest of the little remainder and duration of this episode. But thank you so much, Ryan. You were great, and I appreciate you.
Hey, absolutely. Anytime. See ya.
Have a good one. That was fantastic. As I mentioned it and bringing up the comment here from Taylor, 2 workhorses. Yep, I'm a workhorse. Ryan's a workhorse. The only thing better than 1 workhorse is 2 workhorses. So that was tremendous. Yeah, right. He mentioned where you can find his work and where to follow him on Twitter. Ryan is legitimately fantastic in so many ways. Obviously, I wouldn't have brought him onto the show if I didn't legitimately respect him and appreciate his work. So give Ryan a follow. Check out his work on Twitter, on Syracuse.com, NewYorkUpstate.com, all that stuff. The Shout Buffalo podcast with Matt Perino. He's tremendous in every way. And like I mentioned, we're going to keep trudging on. We're at the 45-minute mark, but we tend to go a little longer here on Disguise coverage. But any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? I know some of them were coming in earlier into the episode. I was pulling up different things here and there, but I know I wasn't able to get to everything just, from engaging with Ryan and so on and so forth. So if there was anything that I didn't get to from earlier, feel free to throw it into the chat now. I will get to it now as we start to wind down a little bit. But I wanted to continue to hit on some of the important aspects of this final game against Green Bay. So one, I thought it was interesting. Sean McDermott spoke today a lot about COVID philosophy and protocol and all that stuff, and not so much about football. But he did mention that Josh Allen would start Saturday against Green Bay and that the starters would play. And he mentioned some interesting things. So he kind of gave some coach speak, and he mentioned it and saying that it wasn't a cop-out, but he mentioned that guys would play anywhere from like one play to a handful of plays. And he also mentioned that some guys would see a series coming out of the first half, and so starting the second half. I think we might see, generally the third preseason game, back when there was 4, was usually the dress rehearsal game for starters. That was the game where you saw starters play pretty much the entire first half, then they'd come out for one series after halftime and then be done. So it's interesting that Sean McDermott may be keeping that same model and philosophy for a handful, if not a majority of the starters for this upcoming game against Green Bay, which is pretty interesting because there's been a lot of people on the fence, especially with the rash of injuries that have happened recently. Ryan and I both spoke about it to lead off this episode and go through this episode. You could easily make a case of being like, we saw several guys get banged up and nicked. We're not putting any of our starters out there. Forget it. But Sean McDermott is trudging along because on the other side of that coin is the idea of you got to get your starters some work. You have to get them in some sort of real live game scenario against another team to get them prepped and get them juiced up a little bit for the regular season. So health is always priority number one. The best ability is availability, as they say, but I'm happy that we're going to see Josh Allen and see some starters and start to get some rhythm work a little bit. But then again, that also, if you're seeing more starters, that also puts more of a premium on the depth battles and positional battles that, Ryan spoke about and that I spoke about, and we're going to continue to talk about as we start to go through the rest of this episode. I want to go, there's a question here from A. Brennick. Injury concerns. Do you think they try to sign some vets at tackle and CB? I think Ryan was spot on in his analysis earlier when speaking about corner that, keep an eye out for a potential trade or potential signings of guys who got cut. I think we know Brandon Beane is never satisfied with the roster. He's always looking for ways to improve in whatever form or fashion that may come. So I think you could very easily see some sort of move, whether it's, we saw Steven Sims added to the roster earlier this week. So whether it's somebody picked up through waivers, whether it's a trade or some sort of finessing, I think you very easily could see a roster acquisition in some form or fashion in the coming week. And tackle and corner are definitely two positions where that could happen. We are thin at corner. We've been thin all offseason. And exactly to this question's point here, with the injury concerns, we're potentially even thinner. And then when it comes to tackle, we were always thin from a depth perspective. You had Deion Dawkins, you had Darrell Williams. After that, Brandon Beane said it when Spencer Brown was drafted. The plan was for him to be the swing tackle in 2021. So Spencer Brown is next man up for both tackle spots going into 2021. And he's been a little rough around the edges, which is anticipated and expected. He's very green and raw as a prospect, but he is very traitsy. A guy who went to Northern Iowa and who opted out of 2020, played 8-man football in high school. So he's got a lot of development to go through. So, you expect the growing pains, but he's the best option right now coming off the bench for tackle. He also has an injury concern with his knee. So I definitely think you could see potential additions at tackle and corner to this question. Yeah, I could see that 1,000%. Ooh, Think here. Josh plays a half, just like Miami last year. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. What? Interesting prediction here. So we trade Mario Addison for Ty Nsekhe, swing tackle for the last several years for the Buffalo Bills, who is in Dallas now. Very interesting thought there. Very interesting thought. A couple other positions, Ryan touched on them a bit, and we had some back and forth there, but I'm really interested to see the safety battle. If Jaquan Johnson is healthy, I think he is 1,000% making this 53-man roster. He's a key special teams contributor, and I think he's shown enough, more than enough, in actuality, on the actual defensive side of the ball to solidify a roster spot for himself. That being said, he does have a knock. His health is up in the air, as is for a lot of the guys who have been banged up a little bit, just because we're not getting a lot of reports. And, Sean McDermott, even when he does have to speak and answer questions, he isn't the most transparent when it comes to those types of things. So we don't know the severity of what Jaquan Johnson has going on. But even, that notwithstanding, as Ryan spoke about, Damar Hamlin and Josh Thomas have both looked good in the preseason. Thomas had a really stellar game against Detroit. Hamlin had some nice flashes against Detroit, and then he played even better against Chicago. The physical aspect of Josh Thomas's game has been talked about a lot, and rightfully so. But as Eric Turner and I discussed in the Cover One film room this past week going over the Bears game, we saw several snaps where Josh Thomas was the communicator on the back end, and he was telling Hamlin where to align and what to do and coordinating things for the secondary and the back half of the defense. So Josh Thomas definitely offers a lot, and this is a close battle to watch for. And I really like the idea. I proposed it last night when went on the Cover One Buffalo podcast with Greg Thompson, Aaron Quinn, and Sterling Furrow when we did the 53-man roster prediction show last night, which if you haven't checked that out, go check that out. It was a tremendous roundtable and discussion where we, concluded on what our final 53-man roster would be collectively. The idea that you could, a lot of with what guys you cut and what guys you don't, again, as I'm going to keep saying, as Ryan mentioned earlier, because he hit on almost everything because he's tremendous. The idea of who you cut really comes down to who can you get back on that practice squad? Who do people not know about? Who doesn't have a ton of tape out there, so that way you can cut somebody and you don't have to worry about them getting snagged by someone else on waivers. I think Josh Thomas is a candidate for that, given the fact that, like Ryan said, he doesn't have a lot of tape on him, really, other than this preseason. He wasn't very active last year, when he came in last year in a COVID offseason. So there's all these things that allow him to stay a little hidden. But that safety battle between Damar Hamlin and Josh Thomas, in my opinion, for that fourth safety spot, I think if all things are equal, Jaquan Johnson is that third. And if I had to make a call right now, I would take Damar Hamlin as the fourth. But I think Thomas is one of those guys who, if he balls out against Green Bay or really shines, he could potentially lock up a roster spot for himself. Cornerback, we started to talk about that a little. Actually, no, I'm going to start to bring up some of these comments. Comment here from Ron. Oh, you want to trade? Ron wants to trade AJ Klein to the Raiders for a solid corner or tackle. I liked Casey Hayward as a free agent. I wanted him to come to Buffalo. I could be swayed for an AJ Klein for Casey Hayward trade. I would be very, very interested in that. As Daniel mentioned, Klein's contract makes him hard to move or cut. Yeah, this offseason with his contract is interesting. Next offseason, not so much, but I would be, I don't know. Maybe it's just I have a soft spot for him. I like AJ Klein, but I would welcome cornerback or offensive tackle reinforcements for sure. And just sticking on corner, that's another positional battle to watch for as well. Cam Lewis, as Ryan mentioned him multiple times, he's someone that the Bills like. I like him too. He got banged up a little bit, or he had the cramps the past game. But he's flashed well and shown well. I think for that potential, I think right now we've got 5 corners easy. You're looking at Trey, you're looking at Levi, Dane Jackson, Taron Johnson, Saron Neal. I think those are your 5 hard locks for the cornerback position. And then if they keep 6, I like some of the things that Nick McLeod has done, but I don't think he's going to be the 6th. I also think he's a guy that you can get to the practice squad. I think he'd be a priority practice squad guy. So I think that's somebody you get on the practice squad. I think the 6th really comes down to Cam Lewis, if they're going to do a 6, I think it comes down to Cam Lewis or Rashad Wildgoose. And Wildgoose, I didn't think I'd be saying that about him after the Detroit game. He had a rough game against Detroit. He got burned multiple times in coverage. He did not look good coming up and making tackles and being physical, which was honestly one of his calling cards in college. So he did not look good against Detroit. Much better game in Chicago. He looked sound in coverage. He was in good positioning. He used his hands well. He had better feet and better hips. We saw that great pass breakup where he came up and just aggressively met the receiver at the point of the catch, got his arm in there and just wrenched and ripped the ball out as the receiver came to the ground. Something that he did at Wisconsin. Again, he's known for his aggressiveness and that type of fast play. You know, he is a fast guy. He's got a good 40. Not that that's necessarily the end all be all for 40 times, but he does have an aspect to his game that not a lot of the Bills corners have, which is a longer type of speed and some scheme and positional versatility with being able to play inside, outside, and a little man to his game. So if he has a big game against Green Bay, I think he could solidify a roster spot for himself. He has some special teams versatility and flexibility as well. He's had a couple nice gunner plays and punt coverage aspects throughout the preseason so far. So I think he's one to keep an eye on, along with Cam Lewis, like Ryan mentioned. I think myself personally, and I think the Bills, I think they'd like to keep 6 corners, especially with the injuries and the depth concerns and everything that's going on. And I think that 6th spot comes down to Cam Lewis versus Rashad Wildgoose, which again is a feather in the cap, no pun intended, with feather and goose comment there, which is a feather in the cap for Rashad Wildgoose, who, again, he struggled mightily against Detroit, but he looked so much better against Chicago, which was a really positive, thing for him and development in his career. So corner, again, the secondary, the young guys and the depth guys in the secondary, safety and corner, 1,000% something to keep an eye on this Saturday against Green Bay. Next up for me, the receiver position. We spoke about in the beginning of this episode and throughout the middle as well, the injuries for Isaiah McKenzie, Marquez Stevenson, Sean McDermott about McKenzie. He said that his injury is in between day to day and week to week, which is also similar for Taron Johnson, but that neither of them are long-term injuries. They're not worried long-term about those things, but again, how does someone arbitrarily define day to day, week to week, and long-term and all those types of things? Either way, their opportunity to play in this weekend's game might be limited. I don't really think we'd see Isaiah McKenzie if his injury has any type of week-to-week thing. And Marcus Stevenson, I think it's awesome that he scored that touchdown against Chicago, and he did it on a bad wheel. He got hurt before that, so it's not like he hurt his ankle on the return for the touchdown. He hurt it before that, and he gutted through it and outran the entire field of competition on a bad wheel. Dude can move, dude can jet. But seeing the Bills make a move for Steven Sims, do we see a little more action from the backup wide receivers? I think Jake Kumaro has his spot pretty much locked up. I think we're going to see the starters. I think we're going to see more Diggs and Manny Sands and Gabriel Davis. But when we start to get to the bottom of the depth guys, do we see Isaiah Hodgins? Do we see Steven Sims? What does Steven Sims look like? Does he flash enough, or does Hodgins flash enough? Someone who we know the coaching staff likes. Do either one of those guys flash enough to the point where if McKenzie or Stevenson can't go, but they get put on the roster and then get put to the IR so that way you can save them, who then makes the team? Is it a Sims? Is it Isaiah Hodgins? Who's that next man up in that receiver aspect? I mentioned it on the Cover One Buffalo show last night. I felt really bad for Isaiah Hodgins, who got hurt in the Detroit game, a game where the Bills ran the ball for a heavy majority of the game. He gets hurt before the end when the Bills have to go out and try and score, so he doesn't even get to be on the field when Fromm is airing it out. And then last week against Chicago, a pass-heavy game plan where he could have seen action and snaps, he's hurt and doesn't get to play in that game. So it'd be nice for Isaiah Hodgins to get some real work and some real looks against Chicago. And I'm interested to see what we have in Steven Sims. I know the ball security issues and some of the consistency has been talked about in his time in Washington. They have a crowded wide receiver room as well. But I tweeted out a video highlight package. Granted, everybody looks good in their highlight package, but he showed some really quality run routes in this video package. A couple of the videos and clips were of him in the return game and the reverses and trick plays and stuff, and just how fast he is. He's fast any way you cut it. He's fast in terms of his long speed. He's got burst and good in the short areas, but he's been a route runner than people gave him credit for. And there were a lot of Bills fans who responded to the video I put out, saying he almost looked like Stevie Johnson out there with some of his jerk routes and his option routes. And that's a tremendous compliment coming from any Bills fan, because Stevie was one of the best route runners that this team has seen. So I'm interested to see what we have in Steven Sims. And if Isaiah Hodgins gets some time and gets some burn, can he look like the prince that was promised that so many people thought he would be this offseason, myself included? I thought he was going to nail a solid 53-man roster spot for wide receiver. Even before the injury, he didn't look like a world beater. He wasn't setting the world on fire. He, had some inconsistency to his game, and he wasn't separating in practice and that like we had hoped for, and hoped that his game would transition from college. So that's an interesting battle to watch as well. I'm going to go to some of the comments now. Comment here from Ron. Wild Goose could steal Taiwan Jones's roster spot because we need the depth at corner, and Wild Goose can be a gunner. I'm torn on it. I really like the special teams value that Taiwan Jones adds, but I could see him being cut from a value perspective. But the fact that he was one of the guys in that first game against Detroit who was like, he was sitting and was like not playing in the same breath. It was like, oh, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, like all these guys. And he's been the only one. We've heard a lot of positive special teams talk when it's come to Andre Smith and when it's come to Daryl Johnson. They've been called like core special teamers or strong special teamers. The coaching staff has referred to Taiwan Jones as elite when it comes to special teams. I think it's hard for him to go, but if someone emerges, you could possibly see that and understand that. I'm going to start to go down here as I see more comments coming through. Comment here from Paul. Y'all going way overboard with the wild goose stuff. It's fun though. I guess me being in the military, I've run into a couple wild gooses. My last name is Sweet. I don't think we're going overboard. I don't think he looks like a starter, and I'm not ready to say like, oh, I got no problem throwing out Wild Goose at corner 2 or throwing him in the nickel, but he's got a lot of upside. His inside-outside versatility, his scheme versatility, his speed and his agility and his aggressiveness, both in the run and the catch point. I think that's something that the Bills can use. Any team could really use, but that positional versatility, the inside-outside and the scheme versatility, I think is something that is very intriguing with him. And he's somebody that I think you could put on the roster and not have be a game day active. I think you could be a game day inactive, and you just continue to bring him along. And granted, he also could be a guy that you cut and he makes it down to the practice squad potentially, but he flashed a lot in positive ways against Chicago. So I think that's why he's trending upward. And then you also add in the positional need and the thinness when it comes to the depth of the cornerback position. I think that's where that talk comes from, at least coming from for me as we start to go through. Oh, Taylor, what's up? I saw you comment earlier. Did we sign Sims for a week? And if we did, is that doing him dirty, keeping him from a real shot on a team? He's rosterable for a team. I tweeted something in regards to this when Steven Sims was signed. I don't know if he was brought in just to play receiver this week and do return duties this week, or if it's potentially a longer term signing because the injuries to Stevenson and McKenzie may be longer term in terms of going into like week 1 or week 2 or week 3 of the regular season. So I think that's still up in the air. Hearing McDermott say that they're not concerned long-term about McKenzie's injury, but the fact that it is a day-to-day or week-to-week injury isn't the most telling thing, but it's also not nothing. And the fact that he was in a sling is also not nothing. So I think it's still up in the air. I don't know which way to lean, but I think you can make a case either way. I don't think it's doing him dirty, though, from getting a real shot on a team. I think anytime you can get burn on a team, because I think that's also part of it too. I think regardless of if they want to keep him long-term or he's just going to get work for this week, I think you could see him play a decent amount of snaps in this week, even if it's just, the starters play the first half and the backups play for the second half. I would think he'd get a lot of the snaps. If he knows the playbook and he's comfortable, I would see him getting a lot of snaps in that second half. And, being a guy that they try to lean on because maybe they don't have a ton of depth because of the injuries. They're not dressing a ton of guys. They don't want to put the starters out there. So I think he'll get a chance this weekend to put some good tape out there. And honestly, he's got name recognition and he's got some good tape out there from Washington. We also don't know who else put a claim in for him on the waiver wire. So I don't think it's really too unfair. You don't want to do anything disingenuous to him, but I think I think he'll be all right in the long run. Question here from Nick, also on Sims. Would like to see Sims on the field with Allen on Saturday. Yeah, he's got a really interesting skill set. He's explosive. Again, long speed, short area quickness. It'd be interesting to see what he can do. And I was very encouraged by some of the routes I saw him run on that highlight package, which again isn't against a highlight package, but it's not nothing that he did that. Comment here in regards to Marcus Stevenson. Yeah, he can't be hid after that return. When you're a rookie and you showcase that kind of speed and you house a 79-yard punt return for a touchdown, in addition to the week before beating his man real bad on that go route on 4th down for Jake Fromm to keep that game-winning drive alive. And then he also showed a really nice short middle dig route. I think the next play right after that 4th down conversion, he showed some good anticipation and patience in his route, and then a nice hard stick and snapped it off quick at the top of the stem. I don't think it's a guarantee if you cut him that he gets scooped up on waivers by someone else, but yeah, I don't think you can hide him like that. I think people are going to see him and know. Question here from Anthony: is a 5th and a 7th a lot to give up for a depth corner? I think it depends on what you mean by depth. If by depth you mean a guy who's going to rotate for corner number 2, I also think the contract length would come into play. If it's a guy who can rotate solidly for the corner 2 role and is a guy who's under contract for the next couple of years at good money, I'm okay with giving up a 5th and a 7th, depending on who it is. But I think that's a rough equation to balance out. I don't know if a lot of depth corners who fit my definition of what I'd want giving up a 5th and a 7th. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but fair enough. Oh, and then comment there from Paul, just the name intrigue. I want Wild Goose to succeed just because I think his last name is awesome. So I would love that. Yeah, Anthony, you're referencing the Patriots deal for Shaun Wade, who I loved as a slot corner. I wanted the Bills to take him in the 5th round, and he got taken literally the pick right before the Bills took Tommy Doyle. I was watching the board and just watching Shaun Wade fall, and I kept hoping and hoping and hoping that he would drop to the Bills and the Bills would take him. He had a really strong 2019 to the point that he was one of the top corner prospects in 2020, but 2019, he was a slot corner. 2020, he played outside. He did not do great on the outside, and thus his draft stock plummeted. Especially he got worked in the game against Alabama. He just kept getting beat over and over and over again. But I thought he had a lot of upside as slot corner. I wanted the Bills to take him. I think for New England, given their defensive composition and structure and all the money that they have that's going to be shelled out to Kendrick Bourne and Aguilar and Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry and Matthew Judon and all these guys they shelled out big money for over the next coming years. I think it was a bigger priority for them. One, to help a guy boost their secondary, especially at the slot position. And Shaun Wade had a tremendous preseason as well. But also the fact that he's going to be under cost control in term for the next 4 years. So I think that's a little different scenario, but that's a very excellent point. And have a good night, Ron. I appreciate you with the kind words and the great show. And you were super active and engaging in the chat tonight all the way from the beginning. So I appreciate you. Thank you for stopping by. Excellent point from Taylor there. Yeah, the Pats DB room is stacked if Gilmore returns. Yeah, Gilmore and J.C. Jackson. I know everybody likes to make fun of J.C. Jackson because he got burned by Diggs on that route over the middle. You're welcome, Anthony. No problem. On that Monday night game. And then we all hate Stephon Gilmore for a variety of reasons. But I still think people are sleeping on the Pats to a degree. They've got a lot of guys returning from COVID opt-outs, and despite the fact that they shelled out a bunch of money, maybe in some less than ideal ways for a lot of guys, they got better versus what they were last year, and they're still the Patriots to some degree. I don't think you'll keep them down for long, so I'm interested to see what they turn into this year. And yeah, that defense with Hightower returning, Gilmore, Jackson, Devin McCourty, Kyle Duggar, and you got a nice little prospect in Shaun Wade in addition to what they already have. Very interesting DB room and defense as a whole. Good comment there, Taylor. As we start to wind down, a couple other positional battles. We didn't hit too hard on the defensive tackle position with Ryan. earlier in the episode, but I think that's one to still watch. I think the Harrison Phillips injury is more significant than we think. So I think he's somebody who gets put on the 53 man and then gets put on IR and comes back maybe like week 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. Potentially, which is a real shame because he's had such a great preseason. I did want him, but I thought he was an easy shoe in for the 53 man roster with how he was playing, especially from a pass rush perspective. And man, he was holding the line good. He was working double teams. He was strong at the point of attack. It's a real shame that he picked up that knock. And again, still hoping that it's not too long-term and not too severe. But the defensive tackle battle, Vernon Butler played well into the fourth quarter against Chicago, which I don't think bodes well for how they see him. They see him as a guy who they still want to see what he can do and get some good tape on him and see how he progresses. I kind of felt like Vernon Butler was originally the odd man out. Despite the contract restructuring that he went through this offseason, any potential handshake deals that went along with it, I thought we were going to see Ed Oliver, Star Lotulelei, Harrison Phillips, and Justin Zimmer make the final 53, especially with the way Zimmer's been playing. But if Phillips is hurt, I think Butler's the guy that they keep. And I know that might rub some people the wrong way who aren't fans of Vernon Butler, but Butler hasn't looked as bad this preseason as people want to make it out or make him out to be. I thought he flashed really well several times against Chicago. Maybe not so much as Detroit, and he didn't do so great against Detroit, but he flashed really well against Chicago several times. And if he's fourth on the depth chart, or technically fifth because, Harrison Phillips has to get, put onto IR, I think that's easily able to be stomached. But the defensive tackle position as a whole, I also like Trayvon Hester and what he did against Detroit. But let's see what Brandon Bryant looks like. Let's see what Zimmer does. Let's see what Vernon Butler does. Because that defensive line is going to be tremendously important, and the interior is tremendously important as well. Comment here, why haven't we signed K'Wan Short? I don't know. I mean, I guess you could extend that to anybody in the NFL. How come no one in the NFL has signed K'Wan Short? Maybe he doesn't have it anymore. Maybe he's asking for too much money. When it comes to the Bills, I mean, it could be either of those things. Maybe they didn't like the evaluation of him. Maybe because they are familiar with him, they know what he brings and they're not about it right now. Maybe the money doesn't work, or maybe they're just comfortable and set with who they have at defensive tackle right now, and they feel like they don't need any outside additions because they've got enough horses in-house that they can put that group together and they don't have to worry about that. Last grouping, Ryan mentioned it and I spoke about it as well. The linebacker position, the depth position. I think it's very interesting. We know Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds are the top two, and that's a terrific top two to have, especially for a defense that runs nickel like the Bills does. But everyone after that, I think Klein is solidified. I think Tyler Matakevich is solidified. Awesome point from Ryan, and one that I had echoed in the Cover One film room and last night on Cover One Buffalo. Tyler Matakevich has looked good in defense and in coverage and on actual defensive snaps. We know the prowess that he offers when it comes to the special teams game, but he's looked strong on defense, again, making plays in coverage, coming up in run support, blitzing, his reads, his communication, all that kind of stuff. He's looked very serviceable on defense, and that just enhances his chances to make the roster, which I don't think we're really in jeopardy. So you're looking at Edmonds, Milano, AJ Klein, and then Tyler Matakevich, and then do we keep 5? Do we keep 6? Either way, who's making it? Is it Andre Smith? Is it Tyrell Dodson? What about Joe Giles Harris? I think Andre Smith is a hard lock for the 5th spot, especially with how he's looked. Ryan said it earlier, he was flying all over the field. He had that really great interception that got called back, but it doesn't matter. Still showed up on film. He had the hit on Justin Fields that was a penalty, but it was still a great play by him. Unfortunate, that he couldn't get his head on the right side and right positioning, and that led to a penalty. But he's flashed multiple times on defense. His run support, his ability to cover running backs out of the backfield, receivers over the middle, tight ends coming out of the backfield. Like, he's just looked good in coverage all around, dropping back, coming forward in the pass game and in the run game. And we know his special teams prowess. Leslie Frazier spoke about it earlier this training camp, and I pulled that quote a couple episodes ago talking about how he initially was brought back because of his special teams prowess, but he's also a guy that this came directly from Frazier, who the Bills feel comfortable, if something happens or guys get injured, he can step in and give you quality snaps and fill in, and that's a huge vote of confidence from Leslie Frazier. So I think Andre Smith is a hard lock as well. So I think there's 5 linebacker locks right now. Do they only keep 5? Do they keep 6? If they keep 6, who's the 6? Does Tyrell Dodson or Joe Giles Harris ball out so hard against Green Bay that they become the 5th? There's a lot of um, there's a lot of decision making when it comes to the linebacker group from a depth perspective. Again, we know what it's like at the top, but the depth perspective is where the conversation starts coming, as it does for a lot of the positions that we've gone over and that Ryan spoke to earlier. And I'm going to throw up the Toodles You Guys banner because we are starting to wind down a little bit here on this episode of Disguise Coverage. I'm going to start to bring Taylor. I see your comment. I'm going to go with one from Paul first. I was thinking we would bring in Rashad Breeland. Do you think that was a locker room decision not to bring him in? Again, there's so much from a speculation standpoint. Maybe it's that. Maybe, again, it's money. Maybe it's scheme fit. Maybe he didn't even want to come here. Maybe the Bills approached him and were like, hey, we'd like to sign you. And he was like, no, I'm out. I don't want to go to Buffalo. I just think there's a multitude of possibilities and platitudes that I don't want to speculate and guesstimate too much, but I know he was a name that was on the radar for several people. Comment from Taylor in regards to the linebackers, 6 seems like too many, being we play nickel. However, we needed all of our linebackers last year. I am in the camp of only keeping 5 linebackers. I think the Bills keep Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano, AJ Klein, Tyler Medikevich, and Andre Smith, because exactly to your point, we play nickel, so we only need 2 linebackers. So I think having 5 is enough. Then I think it really comes down to how comfortable and deep you feel at other positions in terms of roster construction, in terms of just where you feel like you need more depth and support. If we could keep 6 potentially, I mean, traditionally they have, and traditionally a lot of teams do. But again, to your point, that I am really solidly behind, I think keeping 5 is enough. Again, knock on wood. I don't want to jinx that. As we all know, I'm very superstitious. But I think keeping 5 is enough. But, 6 is a possibility just because of tradition and how things have happened. But I think given how this team is constructed and what they do, I think 5 is the more realistic option there. Question here from Anthony. Were there any reports I missed on why Poyer crushed McKenzie the other day? Yeah, the hit that led to the injury. Apparently, Poyer tried to pull up. He just couldn't in time. So I don't think it was just a straight crushing. I think it was more of an accidental crushing. He tried to pull up, but just couldn't. It's a collision sport, and sometimes things, unfortunately, just happen. But yeah, that is very fair. Comments here from Chris. Bills have always kept 6 linebackers every year in the McBean era. You need backup linebackers to play special teams as well. Oh, no, I agree. I mean, and especially having, if you've got Andre Smith and Tyler Medikevich as your backup linebackers, like those are 2 core special teamers. AJ Klein gets some special team snaps as well. So I think you would see a decent amount of special teams play from the linebacking core as a whole. I just think when you combine the special team snaps with what they offer on defense, I think 5 is enough given the construction of this defense, and the fact that the Bills play nickel, and of who they would potentially keep, and the positional versatility and multiple phases special teams offerings they have, in addition to being able to play defense. So that's my reasoning for more of keeping 5. But yeah, traditionally they've kept 6. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. No more questions. I see. Oh, I don't even know why I spoke. Oh, big question here from Todd. Do you think the Bills should trade for Chandler Jones? Might be the finishing piece on defense. I'm going to take a drink as I think about that. I think it always depends on what you give up. Greg Thompson of Cover One laid out a really logical and realistic, to a degree, plan earlier in the offseason of how to acquire Chandler Jones and what you need to do to make the money work. He's still one of the premier pass rushers in the NFL. I don't think people realize how productive he's been over the last several years, especially since he's been in Arizona. I think anytime you can add a stud to your defense, you should, if the price is right, obviously. I don't know. It's tough. Before training camp, I would have said 1,000% yes. Now I've lessened a little bit just because of how positive the trajectory and the trends are looking for Gregory Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. That being said, it's still hopeful. We know Chandler Jones is a stud. Right now, we're hoping that Gregory Rousseau and AJ Epinesa and Carlos Basham could be studs. But again, after this year, even if Basham, Rousseau, and Epinesa work out and are phenomenal, those are your edge rushers really next year. Addison could be gone. Jerry could be gone. So I think if you add another legitimate elite player to that grouping, I know he is a little older. I think he could be a very interesting finishing piece. And again, also, if you are going to make that trade work, most likely Mario Addison has to go back in the deal or get shipped out. So, yeah, I would take Chandler Jones as long as we're not giving up too much draft capital. And if we can rearrange the money and make that work. See the comment there from Omega Outlier is also in the back of my head there. We have to plan to save money somewhere when Josh's deal hits. Paying big to ends doesn't help that. That's part of the intrigue when it comes to Rousseau and Basham and Epinesa. If we get elite play out of them over the next several years, the fact that they are under term and cost control relative to their position, that's not nothing, exactly to Omega's point. And again, other contracts that we're going to have to talk about. If Tremaine Edmonds takes the jump that he does this year, what does his contract look like? I don't think he's in the same class as Fred Warner and Darius Leonard, but those dudes got paid buku bucks. Big money got thrown at Darius Leonard and Fred Warner. And Tremaine Edmonds' extension, if he takes a jump in his play, also considering his age and how young he is, there could be some real big money going to Tremaine Edmonds, big money going to Josh Allen. Stephon Diggs is going to need another deal at some point. So, yeah, there is some money that is going to need to be shuffled around a little bit. That's the only thing that gives me, cause for concern and makes me pause a little bit on the Chandler Jones deal, knowing what we'd have to give up probably in draft capital to secure him, and then also the financial commitment. But it's hard to say no to a talent like that. I just don't know if it's too realistic given the contract structure and cap structure the Bills currently have, and also how the young guys are trending right now and the need for that. Question here from Taylor. If Taryn were to go down, would it be better to play his backup or play Milano in his place and bring in Klein? Wowzers. Interesting question. No, you got to go with a backup. I don't think you can play Milano as the big nickel. If anything, if we were going to do somebody who is not a corner in the nickel spot, I'd much rather put in like Jordan Poyer and go true big nickel, as Greg Thompson would say, and fulfill Greg's dream of going big nickel / thick dime. No, I would much rather put in Cam Lewis or Saron Neal or even someone like DeMar Hamlin potentially. I would rather kick in an actual defensive back in that spot. Despite Milano's versatility, which I love, I think the role that he plays as a linebacker and the disruptor to set up Tremaine Edmonds and be a joker and an overall X factor for the defense, he stays where he is. You kick an actual corner to replace Taron Johnson. But let's hope that we don't have to get to that spot. The comment here from Todd in relation to his comment earlier about Chandler Jones, referencing how the Cowboys in the 90s got Charles Haley back in the day, and that put them over the hump. I mean, Reggie White going to the Packers, Charles Haley going to the Cowboys, there's definitely a case to be made for it. I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze this year and the ramifications it is, or it causes, or it has going forward, moving with it. It's just tough to make the money work. And then given what the Bills would give up, I mean, just if we're just talking on a talent acquisition piece alone, I mean, guy's a stud, guy's a monster. I would welcome talent like that and production like that on this team. But I mean, it's just an idea of making the money and the numbers work. And I don't know if it's an easy thing that you can mesh and join. But from a pure talent perspective, I mean, it's something to consider. But yeah, different time back then. Oh, as Omega Outlier said, yeah, 90s was a different area and different cap too. It's very, very, very interesting. Also, another thing, as Mega Outlier comments here and says, double defensive ends hinted at their plan. Save on edge if possible. Pay the middle of the defense. Speaking of pay the middle of the defense, Ed Oliver is probably going to need a contract at some point too. His 5th-year option is coming up, and then a long-term contract potentially coming for him. I think he takes a big jump this year with Starr coming back. I think he had a better year last year than people give him credit for. I think he takes a more flashy jump this year and does things that people are able to easily recognize, and thus he will get a pretty decently sized contract. So we've got young guys that we're going to have to pay going forward who should be studs and the core members of this team. And given what we have to do financially with the Chandler Jones type move is tough. And Omega, as you mentioned, there are a multitude, whether it's Josh, whether it's Tremaine, whether it's Ed Oliver. all these potential deals that are going to be coming down the pike of guys we already have who we have to resign, I think it might kind of price us out a little bit. And I think that is, I appreciate you, Taylor, saying good answer, good answer. I think that's it. We start to wind down here. We've almost run for an hour and a half. No surprise here on Disguise Coverage. I want to thank everybody who joined me live on this episode. I will continue to say it every week, and I know some questions are starting to come in now, so I'm going to get to them. I don't know why I ever think this episode or this show can end, because every time I think, oh, questions are done, more questions come in. I want to thank everybody who rode with me live on this episode. As I mentioned, every single week, as I just said, the live engagement and interaction is something I really cherish and enjoy with doing these live streams, and it makes the episode so much more enjoyable and organic and a lot of back and forth. So everybody who rode with me live on this episode, thank you very much. I appreciate you greatly. The chat was awesome, as it always is. And if you are watching this show not live, or you're listening to it on any one of the many podcasting platforms, that's completely fine as well. Thank you very much for your listen, your download, your view, whatever. While you're here, please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage. Drop a like. Again, that stuff is tremendously, tremendously important towards helping in terms of traffic and trends and algorithms and all the types of things that get us in front of more eyes and ears and help us to progress as a brand, and myself as well, and the entire Cover One team. So rates and reviews and subscriptions and likes and views and downloads, all that stuff, please, get after it. And thank you very much to those who do. Your value cannot be overstated to myself and the entire Cover One team. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to get to some of these questions now. As we start to wind down finally again, coming here from Lone Wolf, positions that could use more depth: offensive tackle and cornerback. I agree. I think corner depth is definitely an issue. Not an issue, but an area to look at. No, I'd say an issue. It's definitely a cause for concern for me. Offensive tackle as well. Yeah, Spencer Brown is the swing tackle and next man up. I don't think he's ready, which isn't a knock against him. I don't think we thought he would be ready at this point, given his career resume so far. But yeah, I'd like to get a Ty Nsekhe or somebody who is a veteran swing tackle to know that, God forbid, something happens to Doc or Darrell Williams, we've got some stability coming in for them. So I think offensive tackle is definitely there. Corner is definitely there. I don't think there's really too many other spots. I think we're solid really all across the board for the most part. I guess you could throw safety in there too if you just wanted somewhat of a known quantity after Hyde and Poyer, instead of thinking of, Jaquan Johnson or DeMar Hamlin or Josh Thomas. I think safety is an outlier or outside chance there as well. But you hit on it, Lone Wolf. Offensive tackle and corner are the two main ones. And appreciate the kind words from Dawn saying good show. Thank you very much, Dawn. I appreciate you. Comment from Donnie: Ed Oliver will break out, hopefully, since he'll be playing his natural position and won't be dealing with doubles. Yeah, I second that notion. He dealt with a lot of double teams last year, and even so, played better than people realized. I think he takes a jump this year with Starr coming back, and potentially Harrison. I was going to say Harrison Ford, potentially Harrison Phillips, who's looked great, coming back and playing. Appreciate the kind words from Donnie as well. I appreciate all the kind words from everyone. And comment here from Paul saying, thank you for answering questions, super chat or not. Yeah, man. I mean, if it comes in the form of a super chat, that's awesome. And it makes it that much more special and valuable to myself and the entire team. But again, the questions and comments and engagement in general is awesome as a whole, whether it's here, whether it's on Twitter, any of that stuff. I genuinely value it and appreciate it greatly. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for asking questions and having back and forth dialogue with me. So yeah, I appreciate you greatly. And that'll do it for us on this episode of Disguise Coverage. Again, thank you to everybody for riding with me. Please drop a like, review, and subscribe, everything of that nature. As we mentioned multiple times on this show, and you've seen on the other Cover One shows, as we're ramping up towards fantasy football season, we do have the Cover One Fantasy Football Show. And because of that, we also have the sponsorship with Underdog Fantasy. And when you download the Underdog Fantasy app and use the promo code Cover1, that's Cover1, all one word, no spaces, and the number one, so cover and the number one, you get a free $25 with a minimum $10 deposit. So that's a pretty cool thing. So you put up $10 and Underdog gives you 25, and you're sitting there with $35 for any one of their best ball drafts, daily player prop parlays, all this stuff. Honestly, it's a tremendously user-friendly app. It looks great. It functions great. It's good to use on the computer and on your phone. I'm an app guy, so I'm with my phone on it all day. I know Greg has used it on the computer as well. So it's a tremendous thing. We're tremendously proud of that partnership. So download the Underdog Fantasy app. Use that Cover One promo code. Get yourself a free $25 when you put up $10 of your own. And at this time next week, we will be talking about the final roster, and we'll be starting to get ready for the start of the regular season. We are 2 weeks away from the start of the NFL regular season. 2 weeks from tonight, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Dallas Cowboys play. Feel free to put that game on in the background as you join me for Disguise coverage live that night at 9 p.m. as always. And yeah, thank you guys very much. I say it every episode. I know everybody and I know I say it every episode. I know I say that every episode, but yeah, I just honestly can't really get over how much support I get and how great you guys all are in a variety of forms and fashions. So thank you very much for supporting myself and the show and Cover One as always. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones all stay safe and are doing well. Be kind to one another. It's very easy in this day and age to not be kind to people. So be kind to people and treat others genuinely as you would want to be treated. And again, hope you all do well. Stay safe. Stay up. Go Bills. Exciting times. Final preseason game against the Packers. For those of you that are going, enjoy the game live. It should be awesome. For those of you who aren't, stay home, relax, watch the game from the comfort of your home. We'll have some analysis and some talk over the weekend. We got another Cover One Film Room episode coming up. Just tons of stuff coming down the pike as we ramp up for the start of the 2021 Bills season. I'm going to throw this comment up here because, what? Taylor, you threw another comment. I was going to click this one, and there it is. Killed it as usual. Thanks, and I appreciate you, Taylor. You're always great. Ben had another comment as well saying, always a great show. Cheers, Ed. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for riding with me. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the engagement. I am the master of the long goodbye, Daniel. It's because I try to get a lot of things out for appreciation, and then people comment. People got more questions. People got things to say. I want to acknowledge the people for saying things. It's a vicious cycle and often a catch-22 that I get caught in. And I guess all I'm doing right now is extending that long goodbye to your point. But such is life. I appreciate you guys. Go Bills. And I will see you next week.